First of all, welcome everybody. Welcome, Nick. I'm going to introduce you. But first of all, I want to ask our audience to please feel free to submit any question in the chat section, and we will do our best to try and answer all questions. So let me introduce you to Nick from IBM. Nick, welcome. If you could please tell us a brief description of your role within the company and before we move on to the questions.
Yeah, so my name's Nick Glowacki. I've been in IT or software development for, geez, almost 20 years now. And I've been an architect, I've been a developer, I've led teams. Now I'm on the vendor side, which is nice because I get to see a lot of different implementations and a lot of different companies and organizations doing similar type of things.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here, and let's start with this roundtable, which is will be quite interesting. So, Nick, talking about API's lifecycle, governance is fundamental to help prevent issues or problems. So, in this sense, what can you tell us about the best practices for developing enterprise API governance? And also, in your view, which do you think are the main reasons for developers to struggle? They still find obstacles and they still struggle to deliver an API. So, in other words, which would be the opportunity areas to ease the process?
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be a little bit of a long-winded answer if that's okay, but I, I
Sure.
I think it's important to take a step back and kind of look at the industry trends, and not just the words, but what they actually mean. So the first industry trend we obviously have and we have had for a period of time now is microservices. And when I look at that concept, I don't really think of it as as a technology concept. I think of it more as a people concept. And generally, the concept is you take people and you put them in individual teams and you make them independent and you try to reduce dependencies on other teams, other groups, other assets. And so really it's, if you look at agile, it's taking a big team and breaking it into smaller teams and then having them iterate on a smaller chunk of work. If you look at microservices, it's the exact same concept, just applied to a different entity. Agile is applied to people. Microservices is applied to deployable assets, ear files, whatever your deployable unit is, containers, whatever it is, right? And then the third part is architecture, right? Who's responsible for what? What's calling what? And then, I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people face is heritage applications. So microservices basically says it's an organizational concept. It says align your people with a business objective, not a technology. And then they should be completely in charge of the delivery of that business objective from the front end all the way down to the back end. Um, Now, if you have a heritage application, something that's been up and running for 20, 30 years, to just take a bunch of people that are new to that application, throw them at it and say, own and maintain this, it's never going to work, right? There's a lot of code in there. There's a lot in there that isn't going to work. So then you have a natural dependency. And the problem with dependencies and the problem with multiple teams is there's an issue with a handoff. It doesn't matter who it is. If I hand off something to you, you could misunderstand what I'm saying. If your team is responsible for a business objective that's different than what my team's responsible for, guess what happens when you give me work? I got to prioritize it. That takes time, right? We end up spending more time in meetings talking about prioritization and communication, or communicating what the objective is than we do delivery, right? So the concept is break people down, put them in teams, and then they're responsible for the outcome. That's the goal of microservices. Now, this is a natural conflict, and there's a natural rub here with APIs. Okay, what is that rub? Why is there a rub? Well, with APIs, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, forget the provider side. Who cares? all I care about is the consumers and making life easier for the consumer so they could see my APIs. So from the if you took all the people away on the provider side and you just threw out your APIs, do they make sense? Are they rationalized? Is the interfaces from API 1 consistent with API 2? So if you go too far on the left, which is the microservices side and just deliver, versus too far on the right, which is consistency, you have a natural rub. How do you fix that? How do you solve that problem? So I mean, I could go into that. That's kind of the groundwork, and that's kind of the issue that I think is kind of plaguing the industry now. And I'll kind of go into a little bit of how do you solve that, right? How do you find that balance between those two rubs? Um, it used to be, this is not new. It used to be we solved that problem with people and organization, and we had meetings and we had governance review boards and we had, you know, here is my API, or, back in the day, here is my SOAP service. You take that to a review board, they review it, they look it over, and it's the same feedback over and over and over again. And I saw a lot of questions in there in the incoming thing about security. I kind of view security as just another governance thing. It's another thing you got to do. So the new way of doing it is, instead of review boards, instead of governments, instead of meetings, it's build all that into the DevOps pipeline. As the API is going up, generally we all use the Open API spec or the Swagger spec. That's just text. Apply linting. Look for your rules, right? Apply regular expressions. Look for your governance rules. In the definition, you can tell if OAuth is required or a client ID is required. If that's appropriate, break the build in the DevOps pipeline. Don't let them go any farther. If your governance is broken, break the build. Throw a warning. Make it obvious to the developer at the time that they're developing, not after they've developed. And I think the DevOps pipeline is the perfect point in time to do that as we're in the development cycle. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope I addressed your question, Mariana.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Very interesting. And what you just said leads us to the following question. That is, how do you efficiently evolve API security to meet strategic business goals? And also how API can enhance identity and access management and the security requirements on adoption.
Yeah, so it's a follow-on to the same thing. Now, security is a little bit more sensitive, right? Because it has to be done. So in the governance phase, some let's say my governance is I'm very particular about the paths. I want the object slash and then the identifier, and then I have various different rules around git put post, right, or whatever. And so in governance, it's generally speaking, it's going to be do it when you can, right? Very few times have I ever seen a violation of a naming standard or a governance break the release or hold the release up. Generally, what happens in those scenarios is, hey, you violated governance rule 123. Oh, sorry. If you want me to fix that, then I'm going to delay the release by 2 weeks. No. Okay. No. So then generally what happens is we make a backlog or we make an item, put it in the backlog, and then address it the next time we pick up that particular API, and then we address that, right? That's generally the way that we do governance. And you don't have as a review board, you don't have as big of a stick when it comes to the governance. Now, security is a totally different matter, right? Security is this must be done, right? We can't be exposed. So generally speaking, with security, it's the same type of model. Put it in the DevOps pipelines, do the checks at the point in time of development, because when it's released in prod, it's too late. So it's the same kind of concept. Put it in the DevOps pipeline, do the checks upfront in the development cycle, so that things may be adjusted. Eh, now with new security standards of day one, everyone's just using a client ID in secret, and day two, we want to use OAuth generically. Um, one thing that I think has proven true in my career over and over and over again is big bangs generally result in big disasters, whereas small incremental changes and a slow but steady and consistent push generally is more effective, right? So let's take the scenario of I'm using client ID in secret and I want to move to OAuth day two. There's really two ways to approach that. Way one is bit by bit, little by little, every API that changes, you change the security standard one by one. Now that's tough because you have consumers and those consumers are relying on the version. So how do you move all your consumers at once? At that point in time, anytime there's a breaking change or you could break an existing consumer, I'm a big fan of versioning. I realize that there's more of a burden on the provider side by maintaining multiple versions, but who cares, right? In the grand scheme of things, it's the consumers that we care about and the consumer's effort. And being a friendly vendor is way outweighs the pros that we get on, or the pros versus cons that we get on the provider side. So, from my point of view, create versions. Version one has the old security method. Version two has the new security method. You give your consumers a period of time. You basically say, in 3 months from now, version one is going to be sunset. You have 3 months to move from version two. In 3 months, I'm forcing everybody to go to version two because I'm going to take version one away. If you don't want to break, do it now, right? So that's the approach that I would prefer. The next question that you had is how can API management enhance IAM, identity access management? I'm assuming is what IAM is meant, and security requirements on adoption. So IAM is something that's near and dear to me. And the reason IAM is near and dear to me is, let's say I have an individual API, and that API returns you a list. It's a get, let's call it get accounts. Now, me, Nick, I only have access to my accounts, whereas Mariana may have access to her accounts. So you kind of have to do the get accounts based off of two factors. One, let's take a third person. There's a third person, which is internal to let's say, the bank that Mariana and I both bank with. And they have access to both my accounts and her accounts. Well, I could do two different APIs, right? I could have one API for external and one API for internal. Or I could have an API which will return a list of my accounts if I'm calling it, her accounts if she's calling it, and both of our accounts if we're calling it. On face value, this seems very straightforward, right? But we're talking with a list. With a list, we always have to be worried about pagination. What if I have 1,000 accounts? What if she has 3,000 accounts? There's a limit where HTTP, JSON, it doesn't make sense anymore. So we have to paginate. So now let's say that I have a series of layers. The API layer, which is doing the security and the exposure layer. Then I have the application layer, which is doing the business logic. And then below that, I have the data where it's actually stored. If we were to do the fine grain authentication at the API layer, the top layer, it'd never work. It'd never work because you couldn't ever get the pagination to work right. What if they're the person that was doing a combination, the database returned my accounts first on page one and then Mariana's, but you filtered. So you're only trying to get her accounts. It would give you data not found or a 404 mistakenly. So I'm a big fan of different layers in the application have different levels of security, and you need to pass that a token that represents that end user's identity all the way down. So, for example, in the API layer, you're doing, can this person call this API? Yes or no? Then you would take the token that represents that end user's identity and more than likely the application that they're using and pass that down to the application layer. Then from there, it's the application layer or even the database layer, not database is an old school term, but the data storage layer that is that's actually doing it to do that fine grain authorization of, can Nick view these accounts, or can the person that's working at our made up bank view these accounts? Then and only then can you get the pagination plus the filtering to work at the right time. So as far as IAM goes, I think identity is key. But then further than that, not only is identity key, but that authorization bit and that fine grain authorization bit, it's important to do the authorization at the right level and pass the, not the end user's identity, but the token of which you can, that the token that represents the end user's identity down to the lower layers of the architecture, so they could do that more appropriate fine grain authorization. I think that's important to me, and I think a lot of people, or a lot of API developments kind of uh, miss that point until it's too late, and then you get stuck with an architectural problem. An architectural bug is much more difficult to solve than a development bug. Um, if I kind of go back to the questions here, one I didn't get to is IoT. From my point of view, I kind of view IoT as a consumer. So IoT, Internet of Things. Basically, these are small devices that are very far away, generally going over a fairly poor network. Think of cell phones, right? Or think of a device that's connecting via cell phone link to a tower or something. Um, I view IoT as a consumer just like I would any other consumer. The only thing that's specific to IoT that I think is important, pertinent, relevant is they're generally far away. Generally, things that are far away, you want to minimize the payload as much as possible. To minimize the payload as much as possible, you know, generally speaking, you'd want to have a coordination between the IoT device and the provider to negotiate how do we get the smallest payload possible. As far as and you know, as far as security goes, I, I don't really see much of a difference between an IoT device and and any other consumer, right? Whatever security standards apply to any other consumer, you'd apply to an IoT device. The only thing that would be different is you have to be a little bit more careful about a denial of service or a distributed denial of service attack, because generally you're talking about um, something that's publicly accessible. So, you know, have a little bit stringent hard limits on, and looking for people or IPs that are flooding you with traffic. But other than that, they're a consumer just like anything else. Um, One thing I did want to go back to is the trends, which was a question that we had uh, prior to prior to the security bit. One trend that I think I'm the industry is noticing, and as a reflection of that, I'm noticing, is REST over HTTP isn't enough anymore. There's a lot of use cases where REST over HTTP isn't sufficient. Here's a great example. If I'm interacting with a object called the account object, it's easy for me to want to get account object details. It's easy for me to want to update an account. It's easy for me to delete an account, so on and so forth. But there are more use cases than just me interacting with an object. I want to be notified of other people interacting with an object. I want to I want to know. I want to be able to react to that. And I'm really kind of viewing events as mirrors, as siblings to APIs. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that, where the definition of an API is going to expand above and beyond REST over HTTP into the event space, and looking at the events exactly like you are APIs. What's out there? How do I subscribe to them? How do I react? Like, I think it's going to match. Another thing that I see is HTTP isn't the best protocol for certain use cases. A lot of large documents, so a lot of financial institutions, a lot of anything that's dealing with APIs, you have to send legal documents back and forth. A lot of APIs, you're dealing with images, you're dealing with files. HTTP is not a good, it's the worst protocol to handle those. So I also see, APIs that are returning a location of a document, and then you're retrieving that. Similar to events, I see in the future that we're going to catalog the retrieval of documents, images, PDFs, whatever, just like we do APIs, right? We still want, as a consumer's point of view, I don't want to just interact with your objects. I don't want to just get and update and delete things. I want to be notified of events. I want to get documents. There's more use cases than just REST over HTTP can facilitate. So I think the definition of what an API is going to start expanding. And I think it actually already has started to expand, but I think you're going to see that kind of movement, more and more as time progresses, because we're doing the best we can with REST over HTTP, but there are scalability problems when you're starting to send, payloads that are 5K on the same infrastructure where you're trying to send a 10 meg document or a 50 meg document. So that's certainly hitting ahead, and the same with events. That's certainly hitting ahead, and actually has been for quite some time. But I think now it's hitting that boiling point where you're going to see significant invest.
Wow, that has been fantastic responses. Thank you so much. Very very clear. And one thing, I think we have time for one last question. One thing that concerns to a lot of people, still concerns a lot of people. We all are still questioning uh, how to make money off APIs. What do you think?
Well, let's take software and throw it away. Let's take APIs and throw it away. And let's look at our real lives. And let's look at ourselves as consumers and and go from there, right? And then if it applies to me in my real life, it surely applies to me in my professional career, right? Um, a business function that I can get for free through some other medium. Somebody tries to charge me for that same business function through a different medium, I say no, right? A good example is we got my wife actually got some coupon from a store. I can't remember what store, and it said if you order online, we'll give you a 10% discount. So she went to the store and she gave them the coupon, and they said, no, this is only for online orders. We're not going to honor that. So she just went on her phone, ordered the thing online, got the 10%, and then picked it up there as she was at the register. It's silly nonsense, right? Like
Right.
it's silly nonsense. And the same, you see the same thing that's happening all over the media, is people are leaving cable for streaming services, but companies are trying to now make you pay for the same content that you got for free through the cable provider.
Right.
People are saying no to that, right? So um, to me, it's forget the medium. The medium could be a UI. The medium could be going to a bank teller. The medium could be physically going to the store or the bank. The medium could be going through your browser, your laptop. The medium could be doing business on your phone. The medium could be doing in the API, right? I view APIs as a UI just like you would anything else. I actually view a bank teller as a UI. They just talk back to me. But it's a UI just like anything else. So how do we make money off of APIs? It's first driven, and like I might be a little emphatic here, but it's first driven by the business objective. If you have a business objective that people will pay for, then APIs are just another medium to expand to reach a larger audience for that business objective. If you don't have a business objective that people are paying for, trying to charge them through a new medium, an API is silly, right? So I think it all starts with the business objective, And it all starts with, would you charge someone for this service through any other medium? If the answer is yes, then you can make money off of your APIs. If the answer is no, well, you can build it, but I can't tell you anyone will come.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Very well. Well, our time is up, and I want to thank you for sharing all these insights. Very interesting. Thank our audience, and I encourage our audience to visit the IBM booth at our partners village, and also to remind you that you can participate in this challenge, the treasure hunt, and you might win a prize. I think it's a $500 card. I think. And well, thank you all so much for joining us. Nick, thank you so much again, and well, keep enjoying this event, and we'll see you until next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.